Welcome to Podcash, the portable professional development podcast from CASH alumni. CASH alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health, and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Here's what's coming up.
Most teachers will be going, oh, what I want you to do next is I want you to stand up and I want you to do it and I want you, and we're going to do this and then we're going to do that. All the actual instructions are embedded in a lot of waffle. And for EAL learners, they can't pick that out. So what they need is for teachers just to go, stand up, come here, point to this, read that.
Let's jump in to this week's episode.
My name's Maria Harding da Rosa, and I'm an English language teacher and teacher trainer. I've been in the business for nearly 30 years now. So I'm a CELTA tutor and a Delta tutor, as well as having a PGCE in primary education. I've also qualified as a primary teacher, and now I'm specialising in teacher training for EAL, for English as an Additional Language, to help subject teachers who may be faced with EAL learners, and for classroom teachers, as well as EAL coordinators. I actually started teaching English when I went to Portugal to live, and I did my, CELTA many years ago. And I was lucky enough to work at International House in Porto, and I was there for 15 years. During that time, I specialised in teaching young learners, so that was anything under 18, children under 18 at the time, mainly because no one else wanted to teach them. So I just took all of the classes and obviously gained loads and loads of experience straight off in teaching children English. Gradually from then, I kind of built up my experience. Within a year or two, my director of studies had asked me if I would present a session at a symposium at International House Portugal. So from that point onwards, every conference and every opportunity I got, I would try and present and share my ideas. But the added bonus with that was that I got into loads and loads of conferences free. I was able to go around and see lots of fantastic speakers and do a lot of networking. And so for 15 years in Portugal, I did loads of this. And then got involved in running the International House Certificate in Teaching Young Learners. And I was involved in writing it as well. Obviously, I used my experience to get involved in writing it and getting it standardized. Part of that meant rewriting some sessions, but making sure that all the schools across the International House World Organization were doing the same standard. The course is now accredited by Cambridge Assessment Unit, which I'm very proud of, the fact that I've contributed so much to it, and it's now a Cambridge Assessment certificate. Then I wanted to move back to the UK. And so in order to do that, I did a master's in teaching English to young learners at York University. So that gave me the qualification to be able to sort of be more employable when I came back to the UK. So I moved back here in 2010 and got transferred over to International House Newcastle, which I stayed at for 10 years. And while I was there, trained up as a CELTA tutor and a Delta tutor. But CELTA was a very big exam and course that we ran there, and just learned so much about teacher training and about teaching. So I trained as a CELTA and Delta tutor at International House Newcastle. But we also had a lot of CLIL teachers. Now, CLIL stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. And this is what they're doing in Europe, where they are teaching their subject in English so that children are having both content and language and being able to sort of put all of these things together and learn better. But a lot of the teachers didn't really understand what CLIL were, the Spanish teachers or the Italians. So they would come to us for a course. So again, I wrote a course for International House, which was the TKT, a Teaching Knowledge Test for Cambridge University in CLIL. And we had loads and loads of interest in that. And so that's kind of my background. So I'm using that knowledge and transferring it because it's so similar to EAL. And now I'm in a position where I can set up my own business and run courses in helping teachers teach English as an additional language.
That's incredible. How do you think your experience of learning a new language, being in Portugal, has then shaped your approach to teaching language?
Totally. Portuguese is not an easy language to learn, as there are something like 50 different verb endings, whereas in English we have one. Portuguese there was 50. So it wasn't an easy thing to learn. The way I learned best was by learning chunks of language and through listening to the sounds and the rhythm of it. And I would just use a lot of chunks of language and sort of put in and substitute words around that. And so a lot of my teaching reflected that, because I was very much interested in how rhythmic work helped learners to learn. And I've done a lot of sessions on and done a lot of study in how creating rhyme and rhythms helps with their intonation and helps children really find that thing. I've done a chant with a group of kids in Portugal, which was just something like, "Can I borrow a pencil, please?" And I'd spend a whole lesson just getting them to go, "Can I borrow a pencil, please?" And I wrote when I was doing my master's, my diary saying, are they always going to say it like that? I didn't want them to grow up and be going around going, "Can I borrow a pencil, please?" It literally took only a few months for one of the little girls just to go, "Can I borrow, please?" And to use this perfect intonation and change it for what she actually wanted. And I just thought, yeah, this is such an important thing to do, to show learners, to give them a space in the classroom to exaggerate their rhymes and rhythms. Because when they go out of the classroom, it will come to a normal level. So they're not going to go, "I borrow a pencil, please," and really hard. But it will become natural. To me, that was a sort of a turning point in my career. So yeah, I went on to look at that in my master's as well, and to do some research.
That's really interesting. I am not a language teacher, so this is weird for me because I'm sitting as the third wheel in a conversation between two qualified language teachers. That idea of like rhythm and I suppose language as music is fascinating. I am a musician and I am a language learner. Tell us more about what you've found in your research, in your studies about rhythm and music and language learning.
The research that I did, they were all going to do the same structure. I divided my classes into 4 groups. So one, it was just spoken language and they just looked at the spoken. One had song to learn. One did this exaggerated rhythm. Basically, it showed that although their intonation improved, especially the ones with music and the rhythm, what also came out of it was the fact that they were more engaged in the lessons. And they took away a lot more than just the rhythm and intonation of the English phrases that they were studying. They were just much more engaged. They were, and they enjoyed it a lot more. You could feel from the energy in the classroom. And I think it was a really important part of the research.
I definitely agree that when you make lessons fun and more engaging in that way, I think people absorb a lot more information.
I once read something that said young learner teachers make better adult teachers. They are more animated and they're probably use activities that are more engaging for adults. And after all, there's a child in everyone, isn't there, really, So the rhythmic work that I've talked about, I would do exactly the same thing with children as with adults. So I've had classes of beginner adults, men from the Middle East or any age, and still got them to chant the language so that they could then go on and use it later. The other really important thing about these chants is that it makes the language memorable and it keeps the language alive in their brains. Obviously, when I was teaching at International House in Newcastle, most of the students there were adults. We did have some teenagers, but most of them were adults. And so I did a lot of chanting with them. And some of them would come to me and say, "Well, we're walking down the street in London, we're doing something." And that's all they could think of while they're walking down the streets, because I was keeping that language in their heads alive. The reason you want to do that, even if it's a structure beyond where they're at, they've got it then for a reference. So if they've been chanting or whatever, and they've got, oh, I've eaten an apple today, then they can then go back and go, oh, I've eaten an apple. That's the present perfect. And why we're looking at it. And they can then start studying it. They're already using it. And I think then that helps the language acquisition accelerate much, much quicker.
Introducing Cash Alumni Plus membership, your passport to exclusive features and professional development opportunities. You can now choose to elevate your membership experience and enjoy a host of enhanced benefits, including a brand new comprehensive library of e-learning modules and cashback discounts worth up to an average of £329 in savings per year. Expand your circle, exchange ideas, and stay ahead of industry developments with access to networking events both online and in person. Plus, with access to employment and career guidance sessions, you can confidently navigate your career path with personalised advice and job opportunities tailored just for you. Upgrade to Cash Alumni Plus membership for only £25 per year to access all these features and more. Head over to your member homepage or use the Join Us link in the show notes for this episode to find out more.
You've just said that learners will be able to think about this as the present perfect, but as a fairly proficient English language speaker, where it is my native tongue, and as someone who did an A-level in English language, I don't think that I could sit and listen to sentences and tell you what was present perfect tense versus what was present any other kind of whatever. What differs from teaching English to people where it may be their first thing?
I mean, the main difference is that when you come to second language acquisition, you've already got a first language. And so you can use that as a reference. But if you think about the conditions you have when you learn a first language, so as a child, when you're learning, you do a lot of listening. You're listening for about 3 or 4 years and you're acquiring that language. You're then trying and experimenting with it. So your first thing you're learning is to listen. Then you learn to speak. And then we build into reading and then writing. The grammar just gets acquired, doesn't it? You don't actually, like you said, you don't actually learn what the different tenses are. Especially in the British education system, you very rarely look at it. If I said to you, what's a past participle, you wouldn't have a clue.
No idea.
And you need the past participles in order to form the present perfect. So I think the difference in learning a second language is that first, you're obviously going to be older, unless you've been brought up bilingual. You've got your first language to help you to analyze it, but then you kind of need a little bit more support in looking at forms and looking at structures so that you identify them and therefore be able to use them. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And it does then make sense as to why there would be that emphasis on grammar. Because I think that's one of the things that is different across most languages or language types. I suppose the question that I'd follow up with that is that if the first language can be helpful for people who are learning a second language and having something to reference.
Absolutely. Now, and there are definitely 2 schools of thought at the moment. When I was teaching in Portugal, I never, ever used Portuguese in the classroom. Everything was done in English. So right from the children, if they were 5 or 6 years old and they spoke no English, I would only use English in the classroom. And they very, very quickly understood what I wanted them to do. I would use lots of gestures and images, and I was able to convey meaning really quickly and easily because, like we've said before, they are like little sponges, but they're also very open to how they want to understand what you're saying. So they really try. And then gradually, when they go into schools, and their teachers in Portugal would often use Portuguese in the classroom for classroom management. So just the lesson was in English, but the management is all in Portuguese. And again, they would just start relying on the fact that, oh, well, I'll know what to do because she'll tell me in Portuguese. So they stop trying to understand. And again, in Portugal, a lot of the teachers would explain the grammar in Portuguese. They would explain the English grammar. Whereas I wouldn't. In the language schools, we tended just to use English to help them because that's, you're trying to convey meaning. It's still, the topic is just happens to be English. At the moment in this country, there's a lot of idea of translanguaging. So being able to use their first language in the classroom. Is it a hindrance? I feel sometimes after much emphasis on making sure that the learners have got access to the content of the lesson. So they will provide them with translations or let them do things in their own language first. The objective is not to make them into better language learners, but to make sure that the content of the lesson is accessible. So there's a subtle difference. Sometimes I feel that there's probably too much acceptance of that. And it's just a different way, different approaches. So if you were an EAL student in an international school, your first language would not be allowed to be used and it would just all be in English. And I think the progress would probably be a lot faster. Whereas here, they tend to use a lot of the first language. But in their defense, they will get a lot of people, I'm talking about refugees, asylum seekers in this country, where they don't have any English and they're thrown into GCSE classes. And so they don't really have much choice if they've got zero English, but to use their own language to try and make the lessons accessible. And very often, a lot of the children that would come won't have any literacy skills in their own language. So again, it's not just about transferring skills from one language to another, but teaching literacy skills when they don't have it as well. So there's loads of other complicated issues that go on with that.
That makes sense. And I think when you and Magda were talking earlier on about differences between children and adults learning, I think the other thing that I thought about while you were talking about that was that with adults, sometimes there are additional barriers just because adults bring past experiences with them and things like that. So is there anything that when you're teaching, because you have taught in that sort of environment where maybe people are coming to learn a language because they have to rather than because they've chosen to or because it's something that they're really excited about. Like when I go to a German lesson, I'm getting excited because I want to learn German and I've chosen to do it and I'm going to go on my holidays to Germany. It's going to be great. But if someone said to us, oh, you're going to start going to a Portuguese lesson once a week because you have to learn Portuguese, I can imagine that being less enthusiastic about that might make it more difficult for me to learn.
Absolutely. So most adults, when they come to learn English, it's because of an extrinsic motivation. It's because they want to get an exam, they want to go to university, they want to progress in their career. And so they're driven to try and learn English for those reasons. For children, when they're learning English in Portugal, for example, it's the parents that are driving them to do it. So you then have to find motivation through the tasks you give them and helping them find that intrinsic motivation because they don't have that extrinsic one. As far as EAL learners in this country are concerned, I think they're quite aware that they need to do it. It's not a choice that they're here. It's a circumstance that they've got to get on and try. And I think we need to encourage them to be better language learners and to try and get them as integrated as possible using English as quick as possible. It's not always easy. It's not. And I know there's a lot of frustration out there for teachers who are faced with EAL learners.
Bringing us back to exclusively talking in the new language in the setting, it kind of made me think about what you think is how important the role of other forms of communications is in that classroom. So, for instance, body language, I think is obviously a very big one.
There is some research that's shown that when we are angry, only 7% of our message that we are portraying is conveyed in words. So that's an awful lot of body language, not just body language, but facial expressions and voice tone and energy and how you use all of that. And again, I think this is a really, really important thing to think about in when we're communicating with non-native speakers, that it's not just words. Speaking slowly and loudly doesn't necessarily help because there's a lot more to it. There's loads of ways of conveying meaning that don't involve words.
How do you think teaching teachers differ from teaching sort of your everyday students? As I presume they'll come into it with ways of doing things that they're used to doing.
Absolutely. Last summer, I did a CELTA at Sunderland University, and most of the candidates on the course were either ex-teachers or current teachers or teacher trainers at the university as well. So not an easy bunch. It's not easy to teach teacher training when they already know how to train as well. But the response I got from them was just amazing. And in fact, they were the ones who told me that there's a real gap in our education system where EAL is not addressed properly. And they're the ones who have actually encouraged me to start my new business in teaching English to EAL teachers. I've found that whenever we've had a CELTA course and we've had teachers on it, they're actually the worst candidates for giving instructions. And this is because, like you said, they have just got into so many bad habits, and they're very used to giving instructions. They're used to standing up in front of a group of people, and they're used to talking to large groups, obviously, but they're also used to teaching. And that means that they don't know when to stop talking and giving the lesson to the learners and let the learners talk. When we're giving instructions, we need to make them really clear and really simple. Most teachers will be going, oh, what you should do next is I want you to stand up and I want you to do it and I want you, and we're going to do this and then we're going to do that. All the actual instructions are embedded in a lot of waffle. And for EAL learners, they can't pick that out. They can't pick out what the actual instructions are. So what they need is for teachers just to go, stand up, come here, point to this, read that. So just using these imperatives, the verbs. And I always tell teachers, if you don't know what an imperative is, start with the word please, because the next word will automatically become an instruction. Please look at the text. Please read the questions. Please write them in your book. So you've got those very clear instructions. Using gestures as well while they're giving those instructions. I've done a series of seminars on how to use gestures when giving instructions. And I just think it's really, really important, especially with children.
So tell me a little bit about how what you're doing now differs from teaching a CELTA. Why is what you're doing now needed? Can all of these teachers not just go and do a qualification to learn how to teach English to speak as other languages?
I think firstly, they don't have the time to go and do a CELTA because it is so intense. It's a whole month, 4 weeks, and you have to drop everything, your whole life, to do it. And it's not just a 9 till 5, but a 9 till midnight very often, after doing sessions and teaching practice and everything. Teachers, state school teachers, just don't have the time to do that. They don't necessarily have the money. And then they've got the idea of, well, why should I do this when I'm already qualified? I think what they really need to do is to make teacher training programs a little bit more EAL orientated, given the numbers that they've got in schools now. Whereas they might just get one session on it, but it's not enough on PGCE. It's not enough to actually know what's going on. So what I've done is created an EAL course where the subject or the topic of the course is language learning and EAL. So it's all about how to teach EAL. And I've put it together so that the methodology of presenting it means that they can take away ideas straight into the classroom. So it's presented with activities and tasks to help them get to know this topic, but then to put it into the classroom, and they can go away and reflect on their current practice, try to implement some of the things that we've discussed in the sessions, and then write up about it as well. So they're doing this. And so far, it's had a really good response to people. So it's like a very mini CELTA, but without the teaching practice, because they've already got their own class to practice on. They don't need another class. It's better to practice on their own. So take the sessions, look at the content and look at the activities and put it into their own practice, and then come back and reflect on it. teachers are terrible about reflecting because they always think they know what they're doing is the best. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
This is Podcash, brought to you by Cash Alumni. For job search and careers advice in care, health and education, why not try our state-of-the-art Skills Miner AI tool? Skills Miner is under the Careers tab of cashalumni.org.uk. That's cashalumni.org.uk.
So how do you encourage people to engage in CPD and continue learning?
Like I said, right from the very beginning of when I first started teaching, I would go to conferences and I would go. Then I also found myself doing little courses all the way through. And every year I was teaching, I tried to make sure that I was progressing and doing something different, doing a new level, doing a new age group, something different each year to add to my CPD, which is when I started doing my CELTAs and my Delta as well, and doing that and moving on and doing lots of courses about how to teach online and stuff. There's so many sessions that you just go to and you get a certificate of attendance and, you'll sit there and a lot of teachers will just sit there and want to have it on in the background and just get the certificate. Whereas the course I've put together means they actually have to do a little bit of work, but it means that they come away a much better teacher. While I was studying for my master's, I came across in a book called Teaching English to Young Learners by Lynn Cameron. And she outlined this, one of those things that really struck a chord with me. So in order to plan to teach young learners, she said that there would be these 3 M's. The first M is to meet language. So you do something in order for the children to come across language. And it could be a game or it could be an activity or a song or a little text. They're meeting this language. And then they'd move on to the second M, which is manipulate. So they've identified what that language is, and then they have to do something with it. They have to manipulate it. So that might be to change, if it's a chant or a song, they might just change some of the words to manipulate it, or they might change it in some exercises or tasks that they're going to do, doing something with it. Their final would be to make it their own, so that by the end of the lesson, they had ownership of this language. So the final M would be to give them an opportunity to use it fluently somehow, so that they really felt they had ownership of it. But I've kind of taken this a bit further and I've incorporated this into my course as well. So where the teachers will meet these ideas about teaching English, and then they're going to manipulate them to their own teaching situations. And in order to do that, they'll be making it their own. But I think it's important because all the teachers have got so different situations. So whether you're teaching primary, secondary, very young learners, or adults even, the principles behind it are all still the same. The principles of EAL will still be the same. So that manipulation stage would be where you look at your teaching situation and think about how you're going to adapt it to suit your learners. And then you put it into practice so it becomes yours or you might just go, oh, well, if I changed it a little bit more, I can make it this. I love this philosophy. It started as well when I did my CELTA. So this was, 30 years ago. My tutor had shown us this game where she had different coloured cards with different shapes on. And we had to play Uno to go, I've got yellow triangle. And then you could put yellow square on that. But the next person would say, well, I've got a yellow square. And the next person would say, I've got a blue square. And they're basically playing Uno. That was my idea. And I changed it because I thought that's not very useful language. How often do you need to say, I've got a yellow triangle? Never. But children, they might need to say, oh, I've got a yellow pencil. That's more likely. I've got a yellow pencil. Oh, can I have it? Yeah. They're more likely to want to say that. So I changed it to classroom objects and got them to say, oh, I've got a blue pencil. I've got a blue pencil case. I've got a yellow pencil case. That kind of thing. So I made these games and card games into that. So now I feel I've got ownership of that. And I've shared those ideas as well throughout various conferences and everything. in the day before we had easy to print out things. I'd have to print everything out in black and white and colour them all in and then laminate them. But I've still got the same cards I've been using for years. But then I changed some of the target language as well. Instead of I've got, might have had, I had transport. So it was like a red bike and a yellow car and stuff. Can I have as well? We can use that structure and various other things.
Yeah, I think you could apply that sort of like 3 N's methodology to loads of different types of learning as well. I know that I definitely don't understand maths concepts when I meet them. I have to take them away and manipulate them before I can make them make sense in my head. We're having a bit of a nosy around your website. And another M that we've discovered is that you studied in Mime.
Yes, well, I went to Portugal. The reason I was in Portugal was because I had studied dance. When I left school, I studied dance. I went to a ballet and performing art college, but obviously I was a little bit too tall to become a classical dancer. So I did lots of some cabaret works, worked on cruise ships around the world and various contracts in different countries. One of those countries happened to be Portugal, which is where I met my ex-husband. And so I suppose because of that background, the music and the singing and dancing, the miming, and I was particularly interested in how mimes are used as well.
If you've been a classical ballet dancer, obviously, there's a lot of communication in ballet, like both between the dancers, but also with the audience. It's wordless. Like we all know that mime is communication and that mimes are talking to you by not talking to you, and that's the bit. But ballet being very similar in that you can watch a ballet and you can know everything that's going on in that story. You can see all the relationships, you can see the actual story progress, all of the action, all of the emotion, all of the conversations that happen on that stage happen without words. So I think it was for us thinking about how that understanding of language not always having words, how that's informed your language teaching and how you approach, how you communicate in that early stage of building a relationship with your learners.
Very physical in the way I use my hands and the gestures that I use and my facial expressions, that all helps convey meaning, doesn't it? And it all helps towards being able to manage a classroom, I guess.
What advice would you give to somebody who also is considering starting their career with language learning, language teaching?
It's a hard one, that one. I mean, when I first did my CELTA, I didn't have a degree. Like I said, instead of going to university, I went to a dance college. I still qualified enough to do my CELTA and to do my Delta. And because I had the Delta and then went on to do the Masters as well. Then because I had a Masters, I could go back to university and do a PGCE. So I've kind of done it all in the wrong order, got everything. I've enjoyed it so much. I've enjoyed teaching so much. And anybody who thinking about doing a CELTA, I certainly recommend, if you wanted to travel, not just see the world, but live the world, because I really don't think you get the same out of just visiting a country as you do living in a different country. The CELTA is probably the best TEFL certificate you can get in terms of it preparing you for what you need to know in the classroom and what you need to do. There's a lot of online certificates that don't have it. It's the CELTA that does it. Yeah, if you want any advice, feel free to get in touch.
You've done all of this teaching around the world and done, I suppose, your stint as a teacher of English for speakers of other languages. And now you're teaching other people how to be better teachers when they're working with speakers of other languages. What is it that makes your heart sing about those things?
I love the idea that the things that I'm teaching teachers, they are then going on, and I'm teaching other teachers as well. And I know that some teachers have taken these ideas and taken them and made teacher training sessions out of them as well. And then they go on to other teachers, and then they go to the students and to the children. And to know that for me, there's this little cascade of influence that's happening down to hundreds, thousands of children or learners around the world. It's really valuable, isn't it? And it's humbling to think that that's that that's happening or happened. Yeah, and I take that away. I do really value that. And I just think it's so important to share this knowledge, to share knowledge and to help other dissemination of knowledge and touch other people's lives.
What an amazing way to increase your impact.
I've got these qualifications. I've got this experience. I've got this knowledge. It's got to go somewhere. I can't just let it sit here with me and not spread it and put it out there.
I love the idea that you thought, I wish someone had told me this earlier in my career. And instead of that being the end of it, you thought, how can I teach other people this earlier in their career? That's ace.
So I've got a new website, and that's enriching ELT.com. And on there, you will find out a little bit more about me, what I'm going to be offering. There's also a free resource there at the moment about how to help EAL learners over the summer. So I've put together a free resource, which is downloadable. And there's also links to my blog, which is jmhdr.wordpress.
Thanks for listening to Podcash. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cashalumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and best practice section of the site. That's cashalumni.org.uk.